that there's some spreading out of authority. I think that Brian's, of course, perfectly qualified and capable, but I just think that it's in good transparency to have a citizen vice chair if we have a council chair.
I agree.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, I would agree with Sarah, but my only issue, and it's nothing against Jennifer, but I'm actually having an issue with the process of her just being set in the seat as the next in line. It should have been an open process. I know that there's another citizen member that would have liked to have been on the committee, so to appoint a committee member that I don't feel should actually be in the seat right now as vice chair is when I have a problem. So.
Isn't this just the URA vice chair, though? It's not the full budget chair. It's just the
full
URA
budget
chair.
chair.
You announced
this
it
is
as
just
URA.
URA.
It is URA?
Yeah, we elected full city last time.
Okay, I apologize.
This is just URA.
I retract all of
Because
that.
I would agree with you otherwise, Tracy. I think that's an appropriate clarification, but I think since it's just URA, she was appropriately put in her position and it would be a fair distribution.
Therefore, I retract that because I thought it was because of the position of Bob. So I retract that for now.
All righty.
Sorry. Thank you, Sarah.
No, I agree with you otherwise. Perfect.
Mayor Hodson, hearing your second, do you want to keep your hat in?
No.
You wish to withdraw?
I do.
All righty. That will leave us just with Jennifer and a closed slate. All those in favor of Jennifer as vice chair, please say aye.
Aye.
And
Aye.
There we go.
Jason.
And Greg's joining us.
And any opposed? All right, that would carry now with Jason, 12-0. Okay, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Next up, we have old business. Attached, you have the minutes of last year's Budget Committee meeting for the URD. Are there any additions or corrections that anyone has?
Mr. Chair, I move we adopt the minutes, or approve the minutes for the May 11th, 2017 budget meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Tracy Hensley, seconded by Sarah Spoon to approve the minutes from the May 11th, 2017 meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? And it carries 12-0. All right, now to the meat of the matter, new business. Oh, that's good. Julie's pointing out that we've actually got some new people here tonight, and we should go around and do a quick introduction. So thanks, Julie. Let's start with Tyler.
Jack Pendleton, citizen.
Councilor Tracy Hensley.
Mayor Brian Hodson.
City Administrator Rick Robinson, I had to think to remember.
Which title am I?
Finance Director Julie Blums.
And Council Tim Dale. Go ahead, Jason.
Jason Padden, community member.
I'm Councilor Sarah Spoon.
Michelle Hensley, citizen. Citizen, Andrea McCracken.
The late Greg Parker, City Council.
The wrong coat late.
All right, thank you.
And for the record, as much as I love her name, there's no relation between Andrea and I. I'm sorry, Michelle.
All righty, and in the audience we have our, looks like most of our department heads tonight as well, so. And looks like a person from the public as well. All righty, very good. All right, next we'll turn it over to our URA Administrator, Rick Robinson, to deliver the budget message.
Thank you, Chair Dale. I first want to express my appreciation to, and not just the urban renewal portion, but to city staff, our department heads, staff support positions, Department of Finance, Julie in particular, for the work that they did in developing, compiling, and presenting what I think is a really good piece of work product. So thank you to each of you for that. I want to talk just briefly about process. I am going to provide to you a budget message covering urban renewal. I'll provide a separate one relating to the city budget. You also, several of you have submitted budget committee questions, and after I present my budget message to you relating to the urban renewal agency, I will respond, read and respond to each of the questions that you had presented to Julie, which she's done an excellent job of compiling and redistributing to each of you and posting online. So that's the process that I'll follow. Hopefully that will meet with all of your approval. Our fiscal year 18-19 budget is a little bit of an unusual budget because it's presented something of an unusual opportunity to pay down existing debt. Because the agency is a participant in a bond issued by Business Oregon, and because Business Oregon is elected to issue refunding bonds on debt that included a portion of this agency's bonded debt, our Urban Renewal Agency was presented the option of either prepaying approximately $1.3 million in debt or participating in the refunding bond issue. My recommendation is that we exercise our option to prepay the debt. The drawback in participating in the refunding bond issue was that the bonds would be required to be carried for an additional 8 years to avoid paying a prepayment penalty. I thought this was just too great a risk for the Urban Renewal Agency as an organization and frankly the city if we have an opportunity to pay bonds off and see tax increment coming back to the city to fund city operations. The obvious difficulty in paying down the debt was in identifying the funding for the payment. If needed to meet the bond repayment schedule, we'd worked with Canby Fire to defer their 2018-19 payment for 1 year, and we will, if required or necessary, exercise an option to pay system development charges on our downtown redevelopment project over time. The early payment of the bonds is expected to return in savings of approximately $340,000 in interest charges that would otherwise be assessed the Urban Renewal Agency for the continuation of payment of principal and interest for the duration of the bond payment period. The fiscal year 18-19 capital projects are, with one notable exception, carried forward from fiscal year 2017-18 and will be subject to funds availability after meeting our annual debt obligation and the one-time payment to retire the debt as I discussed above. This evening, I'm actually going to be requesting of you a change to the proposed urban renewal budget. My recommendations initially included the continuation of funding for facade improvement program and the addition of new funding for the construction of a gateway arch to be located on North Grant Street. I do understand that it's difficult for our agency commissioners and you have differences of opinion relative to whether it represents good public policy to advance new projects in the Urban Renewal Agency as distinguished from paying off as early as possible the outstanding debt. What I am suggesting and requesting of you tonight is that because our Urban Renewal Agency budget currently includes funding for the Gateway Arch and for facade improvements in our downtown business district, I'm suggesting that we suspend the facade improvement grants for a period of time necessary to cover the full cost of the Gateway Arch, which I anticipate will be approximately 3 years, and that we reapply those funds that we would otherwise have expended in the facade improvement program to fund the Gateway Arch project. This would essentially be our city's facade improvement and a visual enhancement to Canby that will help to draw people traveling through downtown on Highway 99 into our downtown core, could support banners advertising community activities, and would be a welcoming structure for people coming into town. Our ability to proceed with this project would, of course, be dependent on the identification of resources within the budget after meeting our debt obligations that I've outlined prior. All other capital projects included in the urban renewal budget have been carried forward from 2017-18. These major projects would include contributions to Canby Fire Department, capital purchases, which would be based on funds availability. As most of you probably remember, the obligation to Canby Fire is one that spans, if I remember right, approximately 4 years. It was one that we negotiated with Canby Fire several years ago, and we are continuing to meet our commitment. In discussions with Chief Davis, he has offered to us the option of suspending for 1 year their payment if we need the resources to meet the obligation to retire this debt. Of course, Canby Fire is anxious to see the Urban Renewal Agency sunset as well. Our other major projects include a carry forward of our appropriations to complete the agency's commitment to our Canby Civic Block Urban Renewal Project, and a continuation of the contribution to complete the downtown quiet zone, including funding to support engineering and construction activities at the intersections of Elm Street and Oregon 99, and the construction of medians at North Ivy, North Grant, and North Elm Street. We are working collaboratively with ODOT to develop a plan of action that we hope will yield an outcome that will get this Elm Street intersection improvements done much more rapidly than if ODOT was solely in charge of the project. We're having some success, and I'm asking that you continue to authorize the funding, which will be augmented by grant funding that Renata and our Economic Development Agency was successful in obtaining this current fiscal year to support the project going forward. In summary, the total Urban Renewal Agency debt service requirements, including the $1.288 million needed to pay off the bonds, as outlined earlier, is $3.278 million. Transfer from debt service fund to our URA general fund of $1.519 million is recommended for urban renewal operations and capital outlay requirements, and the transfer recommended from the urban renewal general fund to the citywide general fund economic development budget is $526,399. So I would say, in summary, what you have here in an urban renewal budget is a status quo budget with two notable exceptions. One is a recommendation that we pay down existing bonded debt, and the second is that we swap, if you will, the funding of facade improvements for what I consider a community benefit improvement, that is the construction of a gateway arch at North Grant Street between the railroad tracks and First Avenue.
Mr. Chair?
Sarah actually was queued up with a question first.
So I have a question first, and it might just be a misunderstanding on my part, but I thought that projects that we improved for the facade improvement were paid out as the work was done, not as they were approved. So my concern is we've approved a number of facade improvement projects that in theory would be paid out over the coming year. And if we pull those funds away, like the Bikes and More project that we just approved 2 weeks ago, I thought I understood that they were paid out as the work was done, not necessarily as they were approved. So can you start by correcting me there, and then I have another question.
They are paid out as the work is done, but because we've made a commitment for those projects, we've already identified and will encumber the funds. Those funds will be carried over as a prior year commitment. And
Okay.
That's distinguished from what was built into this budget, which was $75,000 to fund new projects that we don't yet know about or that have not yet been approved.
That makes sense. So yes, they're funded as they come up, but if we've made a commitment, we hold those funds?
Yeah.
So we don't just have the $75,000, we have enough money to
Yes.
fulfill the commitment we already made. Okay, that makes sense.
This year, so they get carried over.
Yeah.
Yes.
My next question is actually just one of my concerns about that, and I totally understand the sentiment, is that I actually think it's a prime time to fund the facade improvement program, because now the Dahlia building's going to be finished this year, and it's really probably the time that most other business owners will then feel incentivized to improve their facade to match the improving facades around town to compete with that business. And I worry that we've invested a bunch of money as a community into the Dahlia building, and then right as that's getting finished and it has the opportunity to benefit neighboring landowners, that we're pulling the matching grant from everyone else to put an arch in. And I just want to make sure that we're being equitable. I think it's the right time to keep investing in our downtown. It looks to me like our end URA requirements are still down between $350,000 and $400,000 over last year, even if we include that part in. So I guess I'm not really sure what the benefit of pulling the facade improvement away is if we're still ahead budget-wise, and because maybe it's the right year to invest there, because the Dahlia building is going to be complete, and we still have a number of businesses that could benefit from the facade improvement downtown. So maybe if I can just get some more understanding there.
It's my perspective that being successful at this committee level and before the Urban Renewal Agency with a new project at this time is a very heavy lift. And choosing between the two projects, the possibility of creating something that would invite the public to downtown, that would allow us to display banners, that would really create something that's representative of our Canby community, and investing public resources to accomplish that is higher and better use of the funds. And if put in a position of needing to prioritize, my priority would be to ask you to support the Gateway Arch, because I think it will have a greater impact because it'll benefit the entire downtown community. And in fact, I think the entire stretch of Highway 99 than doing one or two or even three fronts of buildings. I just think it will have a much stronger and more positive visual impact on our community. And if we have to look, and you know, I mentally try to count votes as I get what has a potential for success and what I don't think it does. And an opportunity to push forward a program that I think can create the greatest overall public benefit. I would land very firmly on a proposal and recommendation, as I have done here, to pursue the Gateway Arch, because I just think visually and from a community-oriented presence, it will give you more bang for your buck.
So I apologize, because I think my question was more like, why do you feel like we have to choose? My question was more why you feel like it's necessary to choose between the two, because it looks like we're coming ahead almost $400,000 budget-wise this year over last year, and that there's room to actually do both, to fund the facade improvement and to fund the project. Now, I just want to make sure I understand why you feel like we need to choose between the two instead of doing both.
Yeah, we're actually really close. The program expenditures are up or down each year depending on the types of projects that we're undertaking. And we had a number of fairly expensive projects last year. And if this committee would like to approve both, I'm fine. I don't think that there exists on a sufficient level of support to move both projects forward. And rather than risk losing one or both projects, my proposal is that I put all my eggs in one basket and ask you to support what I view as the project that's going to have the most positive visual impact for the longest period of time, and take community generated resource and create a community benefit that would be publicly owned. That's kind of my reasoning.
No, that helps me understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Tracy?
Thank you. Some of my question was part of what she asked, so I have some of my information. I'm just wondering, are you expecting the Gateway project to be more than $175,000, and that's why you're wanting to reallocate the funds, or were you wanting to put some in the contingency, which is actually zero this year? I was just wondering why the reallocation.
Yeah, the 175 was kind of a best guess. One thing that, in one of the budget committee questions, actually kind of related to my answer on this. We haven't done any work on this at all, because this is a project that will take quite a bit of work, and it's not one that we would begin doing legwork on before I knew whether we had the support of the Urban Renewal Agency. And if we don't, then we won't engage in that. We won't expend staff resources and invest in architectural services and engineering services to create the model that we might ultimately use. So we haven't done that work. My 175 is a number that I hope will work. We don't have a contingency, and that's why I've I you notice through this, if funds are available, I said on several occasions, I believe that they will be. I believe that we'll be in great shape. but I don't know that for a fact. The 75 would drop down to contingency, would not be allocated for facade improvements this year, so that it could be used with the support of the agency, but I just don't have enough information. I think the 175 is not a bad number, because what we're looking at is probably a steel structure with a lot of decorative features in it, and well, the cost of steel is not cheap.
And fluctuates.
and fluctuates. We do already own the property. We already have the space that the arch would be located, wired for electricity. We've got all the elements in place, so the infrastructure is already in place, and all we'd be looking at is first how to construct the arch, and then we can make a more informed decision on what the cost implications would be. But right now, I was just trying to see if at this level there would be support. There is some flexibility in the budget, as you probably noticed that I was anticipating we could draw from to go up as high as 225, some of that unallocated portion that's based on undefined projects. But that's not the reason that I was suggesting that the facade improvement be taken. It was that I just felt that the highest and greatest use for these funds in the budget year, if you were going to pick one project, would be for one that has a real community-wide impact.
I would agree with that train of thought. I'm just trying to be clear as to the intention of the 75 that's in the facade improvement program. If we were to approve this budget with an amendment, would it be reallocated to the arch project, or would it be in contingency?
It would
where
drop
we would
down to contingency.
then we would, in a supplemental budget, put it where it was
If
needed.
necessary, yeah.
That's what I needed to know, and I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Tyler,
Thank you, Agency President. Yeah.
are you able to get a mic up to you? or is
I
it-
don't know. I was going to ask you.
Cord's not quite long enough?
Construction project. If we could shift each one half a person down, that would probably.
Yeah, mine and Jack's are really close to each other. I can
Yeah,
share
we
with
can
Jack.
move this one down.
There we go.
Yeah, we'll share one. I don't think we've got any more slack here.
We
in
do,
the-
let me
okay.
unlock.
You got to lean over me.
All right, well, Tracy will just have to lean over.
Talk
So I'll
loud.
be extraordinarily loud. I
Pretend
wanted
you're talking to
to express my appreciation for Rick's attention to the prioritization on that. I actually really like the idea of shifting and suspending the facade improvement plan in exchange for funding the arch project. That's been something that's been in the work for many years. It is a city asset instead of a private entity asset, and so we would therefore be building city assets and investing in the city rather than investing in and subsidizing private enterprise on that. So I really like the prioritization of how the archway, and going to Councilor Spoon's comment, the archway serves the entire city, is a community-wide project, whereas the Dahlia was a private project, is a private enterprise project, but the trade-off that if you recall, we were getting there is we took careful analysis of the return on investment by getting that back on the tax rolls. There was going to be, hopefully, and planned to be much more revenue to the city from the taxes that are obtained from that project than we invested, and that was the one reason I could support that. With regard to the facade improvement plan, we've been over this a lot of times, there's not really much financial gain to the city. There's a visual improvement gain, but there's not really a tax revenue gain from facade improvements because they're mostly aesthetic. There could theoretically be some that go beyond that. But so I like that shift. I think that's wise and clever of Rick to go to something that is benefiting the entire community, is going to be there for a long period of time. Facades age and get not pretty anymore after a while. And so I really like that shift and would support that shift.
Oh, I'm sorry, Misty Green.
No, Sarah's first.
Yeah, no, I guess my response to that would be I don't entirely disagree, but it's not like we're going to get a tax-based return on our $175,000 on the arch, which I like the arch. I'm not opposed to the arch. I think the arch is good. And I wonder if maybe there's a middle ground, because I am opposed to making a policy decision to get rid of the facade improvement plan through a budget move, but maybe we can compromise and reduce the amount of the facade improvement, maybe half it, so that there's $25,000 there, so that the opportunity does still exist, but we can shift some of the money, and that feels like a good middle ground. ground where we're finding a place in the middle without making a pure URA policy decision through a budget move to defund a program that I think has done a lot of good as well. And I would be open to an amendment that maybe reduces the facade improvement program by half, or make it 30,000 instead of 75,000 or whatever it is, and keep that intact so that we continue to incentivize downtown business owners to invest in their business while still making sure that the Gateway Arch is funded and is a community asset. But it's not like we're going to get tax revenue in return for the Gateway Arch either. So I kind of like maybe I don't disagree with your sentiment, but it's not like we're getting an ROI on the Gateway other than the fact that it attracts business downtown. My argument would be that that's exactly what the facade improvement plan does. It attracts business downtown and incentivizes people to move there. So I would say maybe a good compromise would be to find a halfway point and maybe move from 75,000 down without making a policy move to defund a program in a budget decision, would be my compromise.
If I can just quickly address that, because it was kind of the difference, Councilor Spoon, is that the city still owns what we're constructing with the arch thing. The city no longer owns the facade that money's going into, and the city no longer owns Dahlia or any of those kinds of things. So the investment is not about obtaining a return on investment through tax money, because we still own it. It's still our asset. So from that perspective, it's different. And I think you're going to run up against a problem if you try and take the 75 to 25 or 30, because then we only have one per year that we're giving out. It's going to be a race to the facade grant. So I think if you were going to do something like that, I think you'd need to break it so that it's not 25, up to 25 for the first person that comes.
But I think that addresses one of your concerns, which is that it's just been a rubber stamp. I think if there's only one a year or there's 1.5 a year, it gives the design committee more opportunity to say, this is actually, we only have one of these to give away a year. If we're going to do it, we want it to meet these standards. Like it actually gives into some of what you've been asking for the last couple of years, which is can we be more maybe selective or decisive in the use of that? If we only have one grant to give a year, I think that we make it worth our time and energy. And I think that that's a fair compromise to say, we'll maybe move the dollar amount down, but keep the program intact, because my other concern is if we defund it this year, it may never come back, and I think it's an important program. And I've seen budgets before where we defund something, then guess what? Next year no one wants to bring it back because it shifts the budget again. And I think reducing the amount as opposed to defunding it altogether as though it were a policy decision that's really up to the Urban Renewal Agency and not the Budget Committee is a more appropriate move, and it suits both of the needs.
Mr. Chair?
Greg was up next.
Okay, and then I have something to address that.
Well, my comments are out of context now, but let me try and regroup. Well, let me first address the fact that I think Rick is very good at counting votes. So I think he's presented us with something that has a technical qualification, which is it will pass. Tyler brought up a terrific point that's always been galling to me in my years on council, is that we always have such a short-term memory on the planning process that we do with our community. But it was a very intense year that we did the Highway 99 policy, and took a lot of compromise to get that passed. But one of the key elements of it was a downtown arch. It is becoming more and more accepted that place matters, and we've got 100,000 people driving past our downtown each week, and where is the downtown? Where is the there? And this is going to be it. And as what I like to think the biggest defender of the facade improvement program, I can accept this compromise in part because of the first thing that Sarah said is that I think that with both the Dahlia coming online and with an arch, we end up with what I call the new couch syndrome. That you buy a new couch and you bring it in, and suddenly you realize the chair looks a bit shoddy. So I think one of the key elements that we've wanted for the facade program is to stimulate investment in appearance, and I think the Dahlia building will do that. So, I have to swallow twice on this, but I recognize that things are a matter of compromise. So I could go along for a suspension for 3 years, and who knows what the revenues are going to look like next year and the year after that, we may end up with cash revenues that would allow us to recalibrate this. But if I had to take my druthers, I would go for a gateway arch, which, if we assume it's going to last for 100 years, Tim, check my math, that's $4 a week investment that we're spending to have people know where our downtown is.
Can I just point out that there are multiple, I'm sorry, Tracy.
The arch bridge, or the arch gateway, has been talked about for many years, and as Councilor Smith has noted, it would be a city asset, also making the downtown not just more attractive, but more visible from 99, so therefore bringing more folks downtown, and being further incentivizing for the businesses. So I think that the facade improvement program in a later date would see more activity, because not only do you have the Dahlia project, but now you have more people coming downtown, and thus far, we did say suspended, not defunded. It's just something that is temporary to fund something that would improve a city asset. And if you just lower the amount of the facade improvement program versus taking it away completely and putting it into contingency, I understand your point of making it a more discerning process with the design committee. However, historically, it's been an application comes in, if it meets the criteria and everybody likes it, they get it, then the money would be gone. You'd have to restructure that whole process to make a deadline for people to put their applications in, for us to actually decide for those $25,000 in funds. So I think it would make the facade improvement program more complicated if we were to lower the amount. So moving it to contingency still allows us to move it back either to the arch project, if that's where it needs to go, or we could move it back to the facade improvement program if need be. So I think moving it from the facade improvement program to the contingency line is the best way to go, and I am in full support of that idea.
I have a question.
Rick, is that what you were proposing?
Yeah, it was and it wasn't to permanently eliminate the project. And I need to, in the spirit of true confessions, I look at my tenure in the city of Canby and try to identify projects that can have a material and long-term benefit to this community, and that I can, based on maybe some specific experience I've had during my career, that I can provide some additional expertise to. And that Gateway project is one of those, because it's a construction project, and it's one that Amanda and I could grab hold of, and we could shepherd through to conclusion during the time that I'm still here, and that would, frankly, it would leverage your resource as well, to be able to use internal staff to do a project like this, and very honestly, this is a very selfish reason, but very selfishly, it's an important project to me because I think it's an important project to Canby, and I'm just a little bit ambivalent about the facade improvement program. I've seen when it's been well used that it's been exceptional in improving the downtown community. I argue strongly in support of it, but I'm much more passionate about what I think that the Gateway Arch could add to this community than improving a couple storefronts. That's very honestly, and I just think that the timing is right, and would ask, and maybe it would help. There are two parts to this, and what I've actually done here is to change the city administrator's recommendation that you had in your packet to what it is now. So what you're saying is the city administrator's recommendation, which you can, you're free to change, but I'm not asking you to change it necessarily. I'm asking you to decide whether this altered proposal that I'm making to you for the urban renewal budget is an appropriate budget that you, as a budget committee, can support.
Mr. Chair.
Just a quick follow-up to Rick.
Questions to you.
Actually, if I may, Councilor Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
So I'm in support of essentially suspending or setting aside the facade improvement program for this arch. I think it is a great idea. However, I disagree with the fact that a mix between public and private partnerships within our downtown core is not a good use of the urban renewal funds. And we have proven that that has been a fairly good thing for the downtown core for several years now as part of this facade improvement program. And the amount of money in which is invested in the program overall is a drop in the bucket compared to what many other communities put into similar projects. So while I would be happy to approve for this time, I would definitely be pushing for the facade improvement program to be funded next year and for future years.
Rick, thank you, Jason. Did you have more?
I have two other questions, but they're not related to this arch. When you're ready, you just let me know.
Okay. Rick, by moving it into contingency, let's say a high-profile business owner came forth, and by high profile I don't mean favored, but it's no secret that in the vicinity of the old city hall perhaps, or very close to the Dahlia, there's been a desire to beautify that. If that opportunity were to come up, do we have the flexibility at the agency level to transfer money with the supplemental budget out of contingency?
You absolutely do. There's no question about that. If you received a request that you looked at and said, this is just too good to pass up, you have the absolute authority to transfer the funds. And that's a decision that would be made at a policy level by the Urban Renewal Agency, and not by the Budget Committee, but yeah, the Urban Renewal Agency would certainly have that authority. It's not my intent to do a bait and switch here. I was sincere in putting this together, that in my thinking that it was likely if I asked for both, I was only going to get one. If I could only get one, I wanted the one that would have the greatest positive impact on the community. And I think that pursuing the arch would have the greatest positive impact on the community.
So we do have the flexibility.
Absolutely.
It wouldn't violate the spirit nor the law of the Budget Committee?
No.
Because the supplemental budget would be done in the sunshine?
Yes.
With public comment?
Absolutely.
Okay.
At a public meeting.
I think we were teed back up to Sarah.
Questions. One is, hold on, I forgot for a hot second. I was even taking notes on my questions. But so if, my first thing would be that while I understand what you're saying, couldn't we also do that in reverse? Oh, I remember what my question is now. How many times since we've had the Urban Renewal District, have we expended all $75,000?
We're expending all $75.
Never. How many times have we had more than one application in a year?
Many.
Yeah, 2 or 3, but usually it's been 1 or less, if I recall looking at the numbers. So I think it would be safe to move it down to $25,000. I understand what you're saying, but I think if the facade improvement program is unfunded, we can't actively reach out to businesses like we have done in the last decade and encourage them to apply. People that are looking at it themselves aren't going to apply for a program that has no funding. I think moving it down to where most of our applications have been, 1 a year, prevents it from being unfunded in future years. Do we still have the flexibility if we fund it and it's not used to move it to contingency just like we do in reverse?
Yes,
budget-wise? So I would rather fund the project, and if we don't need it, move it to contingency, than not fund it at all, which feels like a policy decision. And what I would say is that we have a number of major buildings downtown that still aren't full. Parsons is vacant and for sale. The old library building is vacant, and we haven't negotiated something there yet. We have 2 outdoor vacant spots at the Graham building, and I don't know how many spots at the Holly building. I don't see why. It seems like we should want the facade improvement program to remain. And while I understand what someone said about the Dahlia building maybe being enough to inspire other people to build into their project, I think that wasn't true with the Civic building. You know, we built the Civic building. It's gorgeous. but businesses didn't turn around and start investing without some incentive, without being incentivized by the city. And I think there are a number of buildings that we would still love to see incentivized that haven't. I see a perfect need for it still. I understand what you're saying about choosing one or the other, but I think there's a compromise, and I would be completely open to removing the facade improvement, reducing it to $25,000 for a year, removing the other $50,000 to contingency. If more people come forward with a compelling facade improvement program, we can move money up. If no one comes, we can move it down. But I completely object to defunding it altogether, because we've had a number of conversations about fees and budgets. And what we've all talked about when it comes to fees or whatever is once it exists or doesn't exist, it's never coming back. And I feel like if we make the decision today to defund the facade improvement program entirely, we're never going to see it again. I'm completely open to moving it down to $25,000 for a year so that we can fund the arch, but I think it would be incredibly short-sighted to remove it altogether when we have so many high-profile buildings in our downtown that need remarkable amounts of help to come up to standard. And if the business owners haven't done it yet, the Dahlia building's not going to compel the owner of the Holly Mall to do a facade improvement if no other facade improvement compelled them to. The Dahlia building isn't enough to compel everyone to rise up. But I can compromise and see the need for an arch and come down, but I completely 1,000% object to completely defunding it for any period of time.
Okay, other thoughts? Tracy?
I think it's certainly an interesting idea. I've never thought about this. And actually the arch, I've been on council almost 4 years, and it wasn't even on my radar, to be honest. I guess it's on the slate as one of the 99E projects, right, Greg? But we just haven't talked about it, so I was surprised.
We've been talking about it for years.
Although, but not too much. I mean, not since I've been around. But I'm curious what our other experts, economic development directors, what their opinion is, because they are our economic experts, right? I mean, can we ask them, or have you already spoken to them? I mean, is that appropriate to ask what their opinion is on it?
Renata, do you want to respond?
It's at Rick's discretion. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
and I need to come back and clarify that this is the city administrator's budget recommendation. You certainly can change it, but what you're looking at is my recommendation.
I personally like the compromise that Sarah offered on the facade improvement program. A lot of the applications haven't used the full $25,000, so you might be able to accomplish significant improvement without spending all the money and without eliminating the funding. And in terms of the arch, that was one of the centerpieces of the 99 beautification plan. So having something that really demarcates downtown and makes it a unique destination along 99E will really help continue to revitalize downtown. It will also help our growing tourism program to let people know that this is a special place, this is our identity. So I appreciate our city administrator bringing the idea forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, does this actually take a motion and a vote to make this amendment so we can move on to another subject?
Does it at this point? Okay, I want to make sure that anybody else who wants to comment has a chance.
Any
Ed?
discussion?
Yeah, I actually want to agree also with the compromise as well. The saying of out of sight, out of mind, I fear will happen as well. The arch is only one area. People come from multiple directions. Visually, that one area will look nice, but this will allow improvements throughout the whole downtown, because right now we have outdated businesses. Businesses that aren't there, we have out-of-date buildings. It at least will help improve the visual aspect of our downtown as well.
Jack, do you have anything? Mr. Mayor, I saw you put your pen up.
Yeah, couple of things. So, question, so why not budget, if the money's available, why not budget the arch now and just do the project?
Well, that's what I'm suggesting we do. Yeah, the 175 is budgeted right now.
You're just saying that foregoing would pay ourselves back.
Would pay us back.
Okay.
My concern was that I would not have adequate support for both activities, and to me, if I am going to prioritize, the arch is the higher priority because I think it will have the higher visual impact and overall better community acceptance and recognition.
Okay, thank you. I think doing it sooner than later, if in fact we do that, would be ideal. So that answers that question. So if we suspend the facade improvement program, then I would ask that, the URA take a look at then looking at that program and opening it up and having the dialogue to figure out how do we revamp it so that it can be more productive or more effective and as a tool when we circle back and do fund it again or put it back in there as a piece. Rick and I were talking about this quite a bit the other day, and for me, the arch. We had conversations about 99E and trying to figure out how do we attach an apparatus to the logging trail bridge and make it so that we can interchange banners and that kind of thing. And so as Rick and I were talking the other day about, we don't have a grand gesture of coming into our downtown, and with the funds that we'll start to see coming in with the transient room tax piece, I think we have an opportunity there to be able to use some of those funds to help, as we were talking about, as a grant portion of that, to be able to help do and contribute some of the banner pieces to the arch for Canby's Big Weekend and the cruising and those kinds of things that draw attention to our downtown. I think there's an opportunity there to do some really pretty cool things with that as an entrance piece to downtown. So if this body or we make it a budget decision to not fund it, then I just ask that the agency then circle back and make sure that we do look at this program and figure out a way to revamp it and make it a better program.
I might suggest that as a compromise, and I've heard all of the comments that have been made, and we're almost an hour into this one item, that we consider, and I struggle saying this only because I feel like I have kind of made a commitment and I'm coming back on it, but as a further compromise, if the committee would consider financing one $25,000 application to keep facade improvement going so that we can move forward with the Gateway Arch and move this item along on the agenda, then we can get on to other matters and we can perhaps have the larger public policy conversation next fiscal year.
And in the agency beforehand. Yeah. Make sure everybody gets heard before we do any motions. Jennifer?
The only question I had, Mr. Chairman, is that do we have any pending or anticipated applications for the facade improvement grant at the moment?
My understanding is right now we do not, right?
We've just reviewed.
We just did the last one.
Yeah, we just did some. We just proved some.
And those will be funded.
Yeah, those are funded. Andrea, anything? Michelle? Okay. So, Mr. Administrator, do you have a suggested motion?
Yes, I would, hearing all of the arguments, I would suggest that that the funding for the facade improvements be reduced from $75,000 to $25,000, and that the Gateway Arch would be approved as presented in the budget. That the $50,000 removed from the facade improvement project would be added to the contingency.
Okay. Looking around the room, I want to see heads up and down or no. How does that feel to this committee?
Recommendation, so.
So we have mostly
That was the motion I was gonna
yeses,
make.
a few noes, which is okay.
No longer pencils with your math. You're short $15,000.
Doesn't pencil as well.
25,000, okay.
Yeah.
Actually.
What do you mean? What are we talking about?
Before he was taking 75,000 for 3 years, which would have been 225,000. Now we would be going 75 plus
Only doing
50
annual
times
budget.
3, oh, I guess it,
Yeah, the current budget we have
It's
has
just the
both of
annual
them.
budget we're dealing with.
But and the ultimate outcome may be that it takes 4 years to, whatever time period it would take, we would build that into the future. That would be my commitment to the committee, and the agency as a policy body would have to change that if you wanted to move off of that commitment, which is we would reduce the funding to facade improvements until we covered the cost for the arch, unless you chose to do otherwise as a body.
Julie, could you on page 4 just quickly tell us what that looks like? How it would change things?
Yeah, we would reduce the facade improvement program down to $25,000 and put $50,000 into contingency.
Okay, so the facade improvement line that's 2 inches down from the pink requirements goes to 25, and then down below in operating contingency, fourth line up would say 50?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does everybody understand that? Okay. Good, all right. Who wants to make the motion?
I move that we amend the, that's awesome. I move to reduce the URA general fund appropriations by $50,000 and increase contingency by $50,000.
All right, is there a second? Who was first? Give it to Ed? Sure. Okay. All right. It's been moved by Sarah, seconded by Ed, to reduce the URA general fund appropriations by $50,000 and increase contingency by $50,000. And that satisfies what we need to do. All right. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And any
Aye.
and any opposed?
nay.
I'll say nay, but, because I think we should move it all.
Okay, so that would carry 9-3. Is that right? Okay. All right.
Okay, if I may, I will very briefly touch on the Budget Committee questions that came in to Julie over the last couple of weeks. The first, there's a proposal for early pay down of the bonded debt. I'm not exactly sure if it is all of the outstanding debt or part of it. The answer is that it's part of it. It's just that portion relating to the bond issue that was issued through Business Oregon. Second, there's discussion about how paying off early will save $300,000 but require an extension. It would be an extension of 8 years on the early prepayment period for the refunded bonds, which means that if the early payment period was going to commence on 2020, it would now commence on 2028. So it would extend the earliest date that you could repay those bonds. And then if we don't do the early pay down, that means we end the district 8 years earlier. No, it does not mean we end the district 8 years earlier. It only means that this particular bonded debt would be retired effective after the 1st of January 2019. The balance of the retired debt would be refundable at specific call dates as called out in the document. And earliest call date is for some of the bond issues is 2020, another call date is 2021, and a third is 2022, as I recall. 2021, one in 2022. So those are the earliest call dates. Julie and I were talking this afternoon. We think as a practical matter, the earliest date that we could anticipate the potential to repay this would be in the 2027-28 fiscal year based on projected revenue from tax increment funding. The time value of money is a difficult question to answer specifically because it would depend on interest rates that would be available in to the city as compared to the taxable bonds that were issued. The bond interest rate that applied to the bonds that we would be refunding, that we would be paying off. As long as the interest rate that the city was able to earn on its investments was less than the bonded debt interest rate, then we would come out short. Only if those flip-flopped would we come out better. If those flip-flop, then there's a likelihood that we could do better, but there's just no telling, and this is an opportunity to address debt. Doesn't change at all the date that you could choose to retire the agency itself. Second, Commissioner Dale indicated it would be helpful if you could get an updated spreadsheet on tax increment revenue foregone by taxing districts. And that has been provided. Julie put that together for your review. As you can see, starting from 2002 and going to 2018, what the tax increment revenue foregone would be. I would point out that you're comparing an apples to oranges here, in that in looking at the tax increment generated in 2018, you're generating tax on the improvements. Industries that have come into Canby because of the urban renewal agency and the infrastructure that was put in by the agency. So it's difficult to do a true apples to apples comparison without knowing who would not have shown up in Canby if we didn't have the infrastructure in place that attracted those businesses here in the first place.
Question.
Go ahead.
So, sorry, I know you're on a roll, Rick. What's the current assessed value of the industrial park?
I don't have that information with me, but I did earlier, and I don't remember what it was. I just don't remember. I might have it. Here. Just a second.
This is why we email questions in beforehand.
I was doing a couple different calculations.
Yeah, thanks.
Renata, does she have it?
I believe it was about 800,000. Does that sound about right? What?
Renata?
It's $800,000.
800,000?
Initially, was the assessed value of that land is 800,000? What is it now with all the improvements?
With the improvements done.
And the businesses that are in there?
It's got to be more than that.
60, 65 million, isn't that where?
It's greater than that. I actually had that information.
I want to say 80 million, but I don't want to be wrong, so.
800,000 compared to 80 million.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Yeah,
That's a substantial.
I think it's close to 80.
Especially with
Premier Gear.
Okay, thanks.
Roughly 100 times multiplier. I asked Rick and Julie to go ahead and put this chart in. We hadn't had one for a few years, and the question often comes up is how much money is diverted away from taxing districts to the URA, and this shows you.
I actually had been doing revenue projections using the new assessed value, and I don't have the underlying documentation to support it. So had you sent that question in advance, I could have.
Nice.
I have some questions about that part of it too. First off, we have authorized 51 million, we borrowed 43 million. How much do we still owe? How much have we paid down? How much do we still owe?
We do have that.
On page 6.
Page 6.
This is 24. Currently, 24 million.
We've paid down, or we still owe?
We still
24
owe.
million?
We still
Owe? Okay, that's owe.
If we go to maturity, we would pay an additional 10.1 million in interest. So the total of payments, principal, and interest on the debt would be the 34.5 million.
If we by prepaying this 300,000 or saving this 300,000, prepaying this loan, that, understand that pushes our earliest date that we can pay off that to 8 years further out, right?
Had we not prepaid it, it would have pushed the earliest date out.
Because if we do prepay it, it won't push it out.
Right.
Okay.
It will eliminate the debt.
I wanted to be clear on that.
It's like it reset. If we don't do it, they're resetting the whole bond.
Okay.
So that if we pay it off before the 8 years, it's a penalty to us. So we're avoiding the penalty by paying it, by one, paying it off now, instead of entering into another 8-year contract to pay it back.
Okay, so good. That answers the other questions I had following from this then. Okay, thank you.
Then on the second page of the Budget Committee questions, URD will cease to exist after it is incurred and repaid maximum indebtedness. That's basically the question you just asked, Jack. This is 51 million, current principal. Does the rest have to be incurred? No, it does not have to be incurred. The rest of the 51 million have to be incurred. No, it doesn't. Indebtedness increased. Indebtedness can't be increased without approval of the affected agencies now under new law, relatively new law since our Urban Renewal Agency was founded. And yes, the Urban Renewal District can cease after all the loans are repaid. And upon the URD ceasing, the incremental assessed value tax values would go to the taxing jurisdictions that are now within the URD.
Okay, so as the outstanding balance goes down, you retire one bond or one bond loan, whatever, after another. Will there come a time when the tax increment, the money we're collecting is more than we need to pay things off and we can't pay it off because of early payment penalties? I guess what I'm asking is any way that we can partially lower the tax increment before we end the URD, or is it go up to the cliff and stop?
Well, because we have bonds that we can prepay on, some bonds on 2020, some bonds on 2021, and some on 2022, the earliest date without a penalty. We have the option, if we have the resources in the tax increment that the URD is generating, we can take that tax increment to pay down that debt.
Okay.
Once all of the debt from each of the outstanding bonds is paid, but not before. Once all the debt is paid, then the agency can make a determination to close the URD, notwithstanding the fact that there may be some debt capacity remaining.
Okay.
And so, did you want me to say it? And some cities have chosen, was it Tualatin that did it, Brian? Some cities have chosen, as they have paid off bonds, they have elected to drop the amount that they collect and let that return partially back to the taxing districts. It was Tualatin or Tiger that did that here a couple of years ago.
Our motion here is to approve
The full amount.
Right. If we get to the point you're talking about, we could by motion collect less.
And then
we got more money to go.
Okay, so that would go like to the city and the schools.
There's a couple of options.
Okay.
But we won't get there until about 2027, 2028, based on our current projections for revenue.
So some future budget committee and agency gets kind of the fun choice of, well, do we give some back or do we pay down even harder and faster? So,
I have another question. Urban Renewal Agency proposed budget. The Grant Street Arch is now proposed for fiscal year 18-19 for $175,000. What is this proposal for exactly? It's for an arch. And it would be constructed between the railroad tracks on North Grant and North First Avenue. Was the amount already quoted to council? No, it wasn't. Why are we budgeted for the 175? It's a very rough estimate. Has a vendor already been decided this or not? No. No vendor's been contacted. We haven't initiated any architectural work, and we wouldn't until we knew we had the blessing of the agency to move forward.
that answer your question, Andre?
No matter how good an idea I thought it might be. So
I think that was it for URA, wasn't it, Rick?
that is it for the URA.
Jason, did you have some questions?
Yes, I did. Really quickly, and maybe I forgot this from last year, but I have watched the property that the city owned in the industrial park is now under development. Was that sold and that revenue hit last year's budget, or where did that money end up going?
That was sold. That revenue hit last year's URD budget, last year, the current year, 2017-18 budget. The project is actually complete, and Premier Gear is open for business now on that location, and that is part of the source of repayment of the bond that we're proposing to pay off.
Oh, okay. My next question is, and I guess I know there is an aversion to using urban renewal funds for urban renewal things, but being the street hawk that I am, I noticed that it appears that we're using money from the street fund to fund the Hazel Dell Way connection to 99 East. I believe that street sole purpose would be for supporting the industrial park. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that? I'm not quite following you, Jason.
Okay, so in the budget that I've been reviewing, there is a plan to connect Hazel Dell Way in the industrial park to 99E to support the activities in the industrial park.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
And it appears that all the funding for that improvement is coming out of the general fund streets budget, correct?
It's coming out of the street budget, yes.
Okay. Was it considered to fund that from urban renewal, considering that is directly impacting and benefiting the industrial park? So that money could be used to fund other street projects that are not in the urban renewal district?
It can't be used. We actually checked with our legal counsel to determine if that was an allowable use of urban renewal funds, and our attorneys told us that it was not, because the proposed street location was outside the URD, and even though it provided a benefit to our industrial park, it was not, it could not be included as a URD project.
Well, shoot. Okay. That was all I had.
Did you have more, Rick? Any more questions for our administrator? Are we good there? All right. Moving on to number 6, public comment. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this proposed budget? Julie says, I have to say, I will now open the meeting to accept public comment on the 2018-2019 City of Canby Urban Renewal Budget. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to the chair. The chair will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the chair. When you come to the microphone, please state your name for the record, as this meeting will be recorded. Please speak clearly into the microphone and limit your testimony to 3 minutes. All right. Does anyone wish to testify? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment. All right. Does the committee have any further discussion on the Urban Renewal District budget? After the correction? Okay. So on your agenda, under number 8, we have a motion to approve the budget. And you'll see on the second line there, it says in the amount of $7,137,888. With the amendment, we'll need to change that to $7 million.
Oh, never mind. Nope, leave it.
The budget's the same, right?
Budget stays the same?
It just moves
Okay.
positions.
Never mind.
In that case, are you ready for a motion, Mr. Chair? I move that the Budget Committee of the Canby Urban Renewal Agency approve the budget for the 2018-2019 fiscal year in the amount of $7,137,888 and to levy property taxes for the 2018-2019 fiscal year for the maximum amount of revenue that may be raised by dividing the taxes under Section 1C, Article 11 of the Oregon Constitution and ORS Chapter 457.
Jennifer, that was you? All right. All right, it's been moved by Sarah Spoon, seconded by Jennifer Trendy, that the Budget Committee of the Canby Urban Renewal Agency approve the budget for the 2018-19 fiscal year in the amount of $7,137,888 and to levy property taxes for the 2018-2019 fiscal year for the maximum amount of revenue that may be raised by dividing the taxes under Section 1C, Article 11 of the Oregon Constitution and Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 457. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 12-0. Mr. Administrator, does this committee have any further business?
It does not.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mayor Hodson, seconded by Tracy Hensley, that we adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Thank you all.
I love that Jason's like on a 10-second delay.
Don't go anywhere.
It's a satellite delay. All right. How's everyone doing? We've been going an hour and 20. You ready to charge ahead, or do you need a few minutes?
Could I make one request of any person in the audience to get me like a little cup of water or something? I have a
Joe's on it.
It's a gold star
presentation
opportunity.
to make, and I'm getting dry.
I just texted
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Just wondering if we have.
If you need a couple minutes, go ahead. A couple of us have already gone ahead and done that. Come back as quickly as you can. All right, welcome to the City of Canby Budget Committee meeting of May 10th, 2018. If it's the pleasure of the committee, I'd like to rely on the ceremonies that we already did for the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody okay with that? All right, next up is roll call. Tim Dale is here. Tracy Height?
Yes, here.
Tracy Hensley?
Here.
Michelle Hensley? Here. Andrea McCracken? Here. Jason Padden?
Present.
Aloha. Greg Parker? Here. Jack Pendleton?
Here.
Tyler Smith?
Here.
Sarah Spoon?
Here.
And Edward Warnick?
Here.
All right. Do we have a quorum?
We do.
We have a quorum. Next up, we have for old business, the minutes from the 3 previous meetings. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to approve those.
I move we approve the minutes
Go ahead and read the dates on
of
them.
April 6, 2017, May 11th, 2017, and May 18th, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Tracy Height, seconded by Sarah Spoon, to approve the minutes of the April 6, 2017, May 11th, 2017, and May 18th, 2017 meetings. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's 12-0, right? And that passes 12-0. One more item of old business. We, in addition to our 8 o'clock temperature check, we have traditionally kept what we've called the bubble list. And that's just a running list of things. If we sense that we're starting to derail on a particular item, but we need to keep moving, we'll put it on the list, come back to it the next meeting. That's especially helpful if staff needs to do research, and sometimes we just need to go think about it a while. So, all right with everybody if we continue that? All righty. Next up under new business, we have a distinguished award.
We do. So I told you at the last meeting I had a surprise for everybody. I'll pass this around. So our budget for fiscal year 17-18, we won the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award for the first time ever for the city. It's a pretty big accomplishment. I'm going to read the little press release that they put out, and we'll pass it around. You guys can look at it. So this is from the Government Finance Officers Association. This is a national organization that governments belong to. It says the award represents a significant achievement by the entity. It reflects the commitment of the governing body and staff to meeting the highest principles of governmental budgeting. In order to receive the budget award, the entity had to satisfy nationally recognized guidelines for effective budget presentation. These guidelines are designed to assess how well an entity's budget serves as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and a communications device. Budget documents must be rated proficient in all 4 categories and in the 14 mandatory criteria within those categories to receive the award. There are over 1,600 participants in the Budget Award program. The most recent Budget Award recipients, along with their corresponding budget documents, are posted quarterly on the GFOA's website. So it's pretty, I was really excited. I think I actually danced in my office when that came.
This is the award you were telling us about last year that you were going to try for, and
Yep.
you had all done what it was.
We did
Well
it.
done.
We all did it.
Thank you for your work on that.
It's a wonderful thing, and I think it's very well reflected in the documents that we have for us. These are the best yet. Thank you very much, Julie. All right, Mr. City Administrator, it's time to receive the budget message.
Yes, Julie tells me repeatedly that my budget message isn't good enough and I need to redraft it for the budget document. I'm getting the message, Julie. Yeah, we're really proud of Julie and the finance department and our department heads and all those who have worked to make this a better and better budget document. Julie's leadership is responsible for the outcome and the success of the city in achieving this. I'm going to do something a little bit different than I've done the last, this is actually my 4th budget that I presented to you, and each time when I have provided to you a budget message, it's been in a more generic form. I am going to be more focused and more targeted. I have prepared remarks. I'll apologize in advance because I'm going to read substantially from them because I have some elements that are very important to me, and I believe very important to you, that I want to make sure that I don't miss. I will try to make it entertaining enough that you won't get totally bored, but at the same time, I'll move quickly through this. Over the past 3 budget cycles, the city has focused on delivering core services. For this budget, we are holding true to this approach with one very significant change. In the upcoming fiscal year, I'm asking that you place a high priority on preparing for the eventual departure, principally through retirements of key city management. I've recommended the addition of 5 new positions, with 3.5 of those positions directly targeting the development of future leadership within the planning department, the police department, public works department, and our transit department. Taken together, the 5 positions will also serve to support the service levels our citizens have come to expect from the city of Canby. The prioritization of succession planning in the proposed budget materially affects the overall budget. But with an expanding economy, I believe the city is in a very good position to prepare for the inevitable departure of key staff members. Prudent fiscal planning has contributed significantly to the positive fund balances on which our city relies. The goals set forth by the City Council and Mayor form the guiding principles around which the budget is developed. To this end, a continuing focus in 2018-19 is the funding of programs that support the Council goals to have a safe and family-friendly environment within the Canby community. Specifically, the budget expands the park staffing based on increased revenue from park maintenance fee. Park Committee, Mayor, and City Council continue to work to define a long-term strategy supporting parks and recreation activities within our Canby community. The budget continues to financially support community-wide activities, including but not limited to Canby's Big Weekend, Canby Independence Day celebration, and Light Up the Night. The budget continues to support tourism and economic activities, characterized here as jobs and customers, focused on bringing new opportunities to community residents and businesses. Budget embraces a new focus on the Canby Library as a community resource, gathering place, and venue where residents of all ages can come, feel safe, and participate in community-sponsored events. This is the 4th year that I'm presenting a Canby proposed budget to this budget committee. During the previous years, the budget has been focused on stability. The term we've consistently used in describing the budget is status quo. During the next 3 years, I feel it's critical we add the concept of sustainability to our programs, to our goal of stability. As we present the 2018-19 fiscal year budget, we're taking the next step in the development of this longer-term strategy. As an organization, we need to be proactive in developing a structure that will help to make the transition to new department leadership as seamless and non-impactful to our community as possible. To accomplish this, the budget recommendations include new staffing in key positions. This includes a lieutenant in our police department, an assistant planning director in the planning department, a new staff position in our transit department, and in public works, the addition of an assistant public works director position. Using the new park maintenance fee revenue, we've increased staffing from 3 to 4 in the budget. Now that we have a more accurate estimate of park maintenance fee revenue projections, we're confident that we can sustain an additional position or are in the process of filling that position. This will give us a total of 5 full-time employees as well as seasonal staff devoted to maintaining parks and city grounds. And I distinguish between the maintenance of parks and the administration of the parks programs. There are additional staff that are assigned to parks to handle the administrative function associated with paying bills, scheduling, and other activities. The 5 full-time employees are those that are on the ground working to improve our parks and our public spaces. These new positions will begin to address deferred and ongoing maintenance needs in our city park system. This is our immediate priority. Ongoing maintenance of new parks is recommended by the Parks Committee and approved by the Council. Once we've successfully addressed deferred maintenance issues will be the next priority. Obviously, this is a work in progress. Providing general fund support to our library. As all of you are aware, this is a change in policy recommendations from prior years. While our libraries have traditionally been viewed primarily as a resource for the public to access information, the Canby Library occupies a significantly greater position in our community. Heard it referred to by people in this very room as our community's living room. It serves as a gathering place for people of all ages, provides programming for children, teens, and adults, offers multicultural opportunities and experiences, and strives to adapt to meet the needs of a diverse and ever-evolving community. Our library cannot sustain its current programming and hours of operation at the level of funding provided through the countywide library tax. Recommending that the city's general fund contribute $50,000 to the library fund to maintain current levels of services to the Canby community. I would add that during the 2018-19 fiscal year and beyond, we will be continuing ongoing discussions working to identify alternative funding sources to the city's general fund that will make us a library that's self-sufficient and sustaining. But for the 2018-19 budget year, my recommendation to you is that we hold the line and that we make sure that programs and services and hours of operation that we have instituted in our new Canby Library will continue. The City of Canby approaches the development of the annual budget in a very conservative manner. The budget presented to the Budget Committee and Council must meet key criteria. First, does the budget generally address the organizational priorities of our mayor and city council? And second, based on current and projected economic forecasts, are staffing levels, service levels, and contractual obligations sustainable in future budget cycles? I would tell you that this 2018-19 meets both of those criteria, in my opinion. The proposed budget funds a total workforce of 97.7 full-time equivalent positions, an increase of 6% from the current workforce. The proposed budget expenditures total $24.3 million, representing an increase of $1.1 million from the prior year budget. Personal services budget for fiscal year 2018-19 is $11.6 million, which is 6.5% higher than our current budget. It's important to note that personal services costs make up 74% of our general fund budget and 44% of the total city budget. We are a service delivery organization, and we deliver services by making our staff available to the public. The ending fund balance in the general fund is projected to increase 4% over fiscal year 17-18 budget estimates. Currently, our undesignated fund balance sits at a very respectable 22% of our operational expenses. City has established a healthy reserve balance to help mitigate adverse effects associated with the cyclical nature of the economy, and very importantly, here to support the organization during times of change and through the challenges posed as our current economic expansion begins to slow. With this in mind, my objective continues to be to review and recommend changes required to address the most critical service needs of our community and to proactively manage the needs of Canby City government. I feel confident that with normal economic growth over the next 3 years, the recommendations presented in this budget are sustainable into the future. That concludes my remarks.
Tyler?
Thank you. Rick, let me jump right to you. We went to the meat of your substance of your budget with the administrative increases, staff increases.
Yes.
And I want to go right to that if I can, because one of your comments that is important to me is that you mentioned that it was sustainable, and I'd like you to maybe explain more to me how or why it's sustainable. Because what I see is you talked about a 4% growth in the revenue that supports these positions, but we're talking about a 6.6% increase in the personal services budget, which would be a 2.6% gap if I'm reading those right. Which that's my first question: is what's different about that? What am I not seeing there? How is that sustainable? That's question number one. And then secondly, on the 3-year trend, is 3 years enough to adequately establish a trend that's going to be sustainable and that we can budget based on for 5 new positions, which is again over a 5% increase in our total staff? And so that's kind of my concern with that. And then I guess specifically, very specifically, is going to the point of adding what would now be 3, I guess, managerial positions in Public Works. We had one, which was you. Now we've got an actual full-time Public Works director, and we want to add another one immediately when we've been, as far as I can tell, operating quite well, obviously short-handed, but with just you running the Public Works department. And now we're going to go from just you running it to now 3 managerial people running Public Works. And so those are my 3 things that I wanted to bring up.
I'd like to piggyback one more on there is when you say 4% revenue growth over the last 3 years, aren't we limited to 3% on the property tax by, was Measure 5?
We're limited to 3% property tax growth on existing structures, but when you add new residences and new structures, commercial and otherwise, that growth is new property tax increment.
Okay.
And so our property tax growth will go up fairly significantly over the next 2 to 3 years, and significantly over the 3%, given the residential construction that is pending and likely to occur. We know that we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 units that will be constructed over the next 24 months, all of which will represent new property tax revenue to the city of Canby, as it's not being constructed within the urban renewal district. To the questions, of the 5 positions, 2 of them are funded outside of the city's general fund, and so they have dedicated funding sources. What we're trying to do in and I'll go to transit first, in the transit program, is to prepare for the loss of a transit director who will likely be here for less than 24 months, and that person's assistant who will likely be here for not quite that long, or maybe slightly longer, but somewhere in that ballpark. Absent a proactive approach, we could find ourselves with nobody running the ship and no institutional memory and no ability to recover, other than to hire highly paid consultants, bring them in, and expect them to carry the ball until we're able to recruit and find somebody that can replace it. One of our difficulties, and second, let me speak to the Public Works position. I'm no longer directly involved in the operation of Public Works except supervising the director. So we went from one manager, me, to one manager, Jennifer, and Jennifer reports to me, as do all the department heads, but she's running the day-to-day operations of the department. We encountered several issues associated with the management of the Public Works Department while I was acting director. The most significant was finding a way to meet our statutory filing requirements with the staff that we had. Non-management staff being required to file affidavits with DEQ relating to any number of reports that were required filing for the city of Canby. It's anticipated that one of the functions of an assistant director will be to cover this responsibility. I'm also very concerned about the span of control of the director position as we move forward and continue to engage her in new program areas, as having one person responsible for everything, as I have learned over the years, generates a much less efficient program area. We think that we can achieve some efficiencies and some cost savings with our current director, who is also a registered engineer, if we're able to free up some of her time in addressing some of the issues that we have contracted out in the past and handling them internally, and then having the assistant director step in and carry on some of the day-to-day functions that the director, in the absence of an engineer, would have been doing. So there are a combination of factors that we think make this recommendation make sense. The opportunity to save money in contracting out, the opportunity to improve our span of control, the opportunity to address filing requirements that we fortunately have only missed one deadline, which only cost us about $10,000, but still is something that we're now acutely aware of. And having non-managerial staff responsible for that function creates a unique and different issue all of its own. So relative to the Public Works position, those are all the issues. Transit position, whether we need to continue that staff position beyond being able to fill the two incumbents, who are the only staff people we have working in that department right now, role, I think we need to wait and see. It may be that position can go away after we are able to fill both of the new positions permanently, and that position we're hoping will have all the requisite skills to be able to step into one of the two positions that will be vacated with retirements. The other three positions just represent prudent fiscal planning. The lieutenant position, we have a police chief and a lieutenant, both of whom are going to be eligible to retire within about 2 to 3 years, which will leave us no leadership in the department above a sergeant level, which could create difficulty for all of us. Doesn't mean that they are going to leave, it just means that they're eligible to leave, which would leave a vacancy. We're looking for a way to be able to bridge that that gap, the institutional knowledge gap in that organizational structure. We don't want to leave a void in leadership for a period of time. In the police department, as it's been my experience in organizations that I've led in other jurisdictions, that when you have that kind of a void, it tends to get filled with circumstances and situations that take a while to sort out. Relative to the planning director, we have an entire staff of planning department folks, the assistant planning director position, who are eligible to retire literally now, and are continuing to work. We have a department that, in my opinion, looking at the workload, is already overworked for the staff that are available to perform the tasks required of the planning department, and a need exists for a position to, at some level, to support the activities of the planning department today. That department is generating considerable revenue, special purpose revenue directed at from or derived from the applications that they are processing now. That obviously would slow down if the economy were to slow down, but for the time being, and frankly for the foreseeable future, it's going to continue. So I see a very real need to put a position in place that will allow us to begin to transfer some of that institutional knowledge into a new body. One of the priorities that I had identified to you during the evaluation that you conducted on me 18 months ago was in pursuing a methodology that would allow us to begin to put into place a succession plan that will not leave this organization bereft of leadership within the next 24 months. And this is the best plan that I could come up with. So I view the assistant planning director position as necessary under any circumstances to continue the operation of this department in as seamless a manner as we can. I think that the outcome, absent filling this position, will be that the department will fail to meet the needs of the development community that it currently serves. Just won't have the staff either with the institutional knowledge, with the knowledge of our community, with the knowledge of our codes and ordinances that this department enforces on a day-to-day basis. And turnaround times will suffer fairly dramatically from that. And I think it's really important that we begin to transfer the knowledge that our current director and his support staff have to a person that we have an expectation will continue in the organization even after the the retirement of those persons who are currently eligible. Relative to funding, we are using a portion of our, we would be using a portion of our reserves this year to fund these 3 positions. The growth in revenue comes from a number of sources. I had a long conversation with Julie as we contemplated what the impact of this program would be on our budget and our ability to maintain reserves at an approximately 20% level. We feel with the projected growth over the next 3 years that we'll be able to, in fact, meet that need. What it does mean, however, and I will share this with you, and I characterize that I've done a lot of fiscal planning, and beyond 3 years, most of it is just ink on paper, and is subject to constant review. And so what I tend to practice is a rolling 3-year. And next year I'll come back and talk about our 3-year plan, and it will include, you know, the final 2 years of this and where I think we're going beyond that. And I think that that's necessary in order for our organization to continue to grow and progress appropriately and work within our means. I fully expect to come back to you next year in May, if you still have me working in this position, next year in May, and tell you that our projections are good and that the recommendations were sound, and that based on revenue growth, we're able to sustain these program areas, and that my recommendation will next year be what it is today, that we put in place these programs and we allow them to become sustainable parts of the city budget by, again, holding the line. I would be talking to you in 2019-20 about maintaining a sustainable budget and about status quo. And status quo at that point will include this succession planning process. As you know, and each of you know, in developing your own personal budgets, the best that we can do is to rely on our own institutional knowledge, our own experience, and what we have seen in the organization and in the case of the city of Canby within our Canby community in terms of growth. It's my belief that the growth in Canby will support and sustain the positions that I'm recommending to you today, or I would not have recommended them to you. I think that we will come back to you and talk to you about property tax growth, which is our largest discretionary funding source, and because it is incrementally tied to it, growth in I'm trying to think of franchise fees, because they're directly tied. Growth as incrementally growing in excess of 4.5%. I think that's what we'll see. We'll see the 3% growth in property taxes in existing properties, and in fact, in some cases, growth in excess of 3% can occur with existing properties if those properties values were reduced in prior years below the assessed value and are now recovering back to the predetermined range. Part of the Oregon property tax law is that the property tax assessor has a responsibility to reduce property values if in fact real property values decline below assessed value. But once those real property values grow above assessed value, they have the same responsibility to return to assessed value, even if it includes an increase in greater than 3%. And so that has happened a little bit over the last couple of years. That's one of the things that's assisting in addressing issues and concerns of compression that have been expressed by our Canby Fire Department and our swim center, seeing significant growth in these programs. So I hope, I know that my answer was a little bit meandering, but I hope I've addressed each of your issues. And I would say that that a lot of budgeting is a best guess that is followed by a more informed recommendation once we have numbers to support the assumptions. And if the numbers don't prove the assumptions, then it's my responsibility to come back to you and admit that I was wrong.
Other questions on the budget message?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I know that as the mayor, I don't get to vote and do much participation, so I'm going to get my my comments in now. And in years past, I don't think that's even stopped me from chiming in the past. Councilor Smith, I echo a lot of what you're saying and support and hear what you're saying. We have a deep talent pool in our city staff, and the sucking sound that we're going to hear is a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge leaving our city. We didn't react fast enough, I believe, in, Amanda, what were the years that we, 11, 12, 13, that bandwidth, we didn't respond fast enough, I think, budget-wise, and we ate through reserves very quickly. We had to cut a lot of positions, and I think it put a tremendous amount of pressure on city staff to be able to provide the services that, frankly, the citizens wanted and were accustomed to, and it took an adjustment. I think the positions here that we're looking at, and Rick is asking this body, this group, to put them back in and add these positions. He's asking, I'm imploring, because I think what we're looking at here is, if we don't do that, we're going to spend a number of years having to rebuild our staff. And I would rather look at the opportunity here we have to reload and prepare for future. We are one of very few communities that have the economic engine that we have in our industrial park. We are seeing a tremendous push out of Portland for people wanting to live in communities like Canby. They don't want Portland. And that's putting tremendous pressure on us and Happy Valley and Milwaukee and Molalla. Donald is experiencing it. I was having a conversation with the mayor of Kaiser. They're experiencing it. It's a huge ripple effect. And I think if we, I'm not saying we don't need to keep an eye on it, because we do. We're going to, otherwise we add them, then it becomes a piece of looking at taking them away. And I don't want to do that either, because that's just as bad. But we need to prepare, looking down the road, to the talent that is going to retire from our city. We have an opportunity to really be prepared for that. And so I again implore this group to really take that into consideration as we look at this budget.
That's true. Greg. Yeah.
When Brian and I first came on the council 8 years ago, our cash carry forward was 5%. When Tracy Hensley came on the council, she said, I want that to be 20%, and I thought, we're never going to get there. So to have a budget that allows us to address some needs and to have a 20% ending balance is a fiscal position that even our most conservative councilor has sought. So I think we're doing a couple things at the same time.
Oh, yeah, I agree with Mr. Mayor and Councilor Parker, too. I think that as staff members retire over time, we can make the financial decision to replace them or not replace them based on what our budget needs are. But in the meantime, we need to have the stopgap to make sure that we don't have a leadership kind of vacuum or departments that will struggle to move forward at the rate and that they are now. And so I think in some ways it could be a temporary decision to have this many positions. If we're in a budget situation 3 to 5 years from now where we can't afford them, as people retire, you can make the decision to fill those positions again or not. But in the meantime, I would hate to see, with the amount of growth we have, to think that we might not have someone in the planning department is a little bit horrifying. On any given day, there could be no one working in that department. To think that we wouldn't have leadership in the police department. So I could certainly see in 3 to 5 years if the body feels like we're overstaffed and too much of our money is going towards administration, that's a question we can ask. But in the meantime, let's make sure we're taken care of leadership-wise.
One thing we have in Canby that I think speaks volumes to the dedication of our staff is that we don't have a department head that is not a hands-on deliverer of services. We don't have a department in any of our city departments. We don't have a department head who's just an administrator. Every one of them is delivering service to the community. And I will freely tell you that I've had countless sleepless nights wondering what the next step will be if we as an organization are not successful in defining an appropriate succession plan that can help us develop in advance the talent pool that will allow us to move forward in a logical and orderly way. The other, and it's not a unique situation, it's very cyclical, but the other challenge is that the aging workforce that we're seeing in our most senior positions is not unique to Canby. It's institutional, it's pervasive, and which means that we're going to be competing with a lot of other organizations for staff. And if we have an opportunity to get people in here, get them trained, get them to understand that Canby is a special place to work, then we have a better opportunity to keep them long term. And then I probably will have fewer sleepless nights.
Andrea.
Okay, so I work for a very large government entity, and we have this problem, and we have over 1,500 people, probably even more than that, actually, way more than that. And that's one of the struggles that we have as city employees, and it's hard because the thing is you also have to be able to attract the next generation, and that's one thing that's really difficult that we're finding. So I know that our HR department is definitely making steps to try and bring younger generations in to help with the retirement. My personal experience, I had a coworker who retired in December, and I was doing 2 full-time positions for 3 months and took that on, and that was not very fun, but I know that if we're seeing it in the city of Portland, then yes, you guys will see it too, and that's very important, definitely, is to have those additional positions in there, because it's hard. Our CAO had predicted that we were probably going to see about 200 people retiring in just one bureau in a year. So, just my 2 cents.
I guess I'm going to have to be the one that talks about for the other side a little bit. I heard one thing that bothered me is that we're using reserves in this current budget, and that's okay, growth will make it up. Okay, it's been 10 years now since the last budget or the last recession, depression, whatever. The good times don't go on forever, number one. Number two, there's been articles in the paper and so forth about the economy slowing down and so forth. I don't know. I don't think we're looking for a crash or anything, but I'm just wondering, is there some compromise here where instead of doing all 5 positions in 1 year and dipping into the reserves, could we do 3 this year and 2 next year? I mean, because I don't know what the schedule of the personnel involved is. That's the unknown side of it. If the retirements are really imminent, we are probably going to end up spending as much or more money filling in leadership vacuums than we are going to in having people in there. But I'm just wondering, is there some kind of compromise there?
The retirements, we don't have the letters, but from conversations, the retirements are pretty imminent, and it concerns me greatly. Each of the positions are such highly skilled positions, and they're so hard to fill. and I've experienced a lot of the same. I used to run an organization with 4,600 employees. And both the downside of having to lay off hundreds and hundreds of people and during a down economy, and the upside of being able to find key staff in a timely fashion are persuasive. But I think in our situation, and we're obviously not a unique public agency, but in our situation, I think that we would find it short-sighted, and we would be asking ourselves, why didn't we make this move to hire these people at this time and address this issue when we had the opportunity to do so. My guess is that 18 months from now, most or all of those people would be gone.
Edward, queued up
So
next.
mine's more in the, for the police department, they might be able to answer it as well. And first off, so the feeling is the chief and the lieutenant will leave the next 18 months, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Say that again?
The police, for the chief and the lieutenant will leave in the next 18 months.
They have to make that decision. I can't say that for them. They haven't given notice. Let's just say they're eligible within
And
3 years.
We're focused on growth of Canby, so how prudent is it to get that lieutenant this year compared to next year, and instead get patrolling officers? I mean, where is that, what am I trying to say? Is it more important to get that lieutenant or more patrolling officers for this growth? Because I feel like we're seeing high growth of residential now, high growth of traffic, and I'm seeing less and less officers out there.
We have a good supply of officers that for a community our size. Would we like more? Yeah, we would like more. However, the chief and I had several conversations about this and weighed the value of another officer against the value of a lieutenant position, and I felt very strongly that a lieutenant position was the way to go, because I was looking at the responsibility of the city to fill the chief's position when he decides to retire, and the uncertainty about whether an internal promotion would be an option or not. The incumbent in the lieutenant position has decisions that he's going to need to make. He's eligible to retire very shortly, and we're not pushing him out the door, and he has every opportunity. And we have tremendous respect for Lieutenant Troe, but we also recognize that he has options, and he's going to make those choices based on what he feels represent the best interest for himself and his family, and they may not include law enforcement in the future. And we want to make sure that if that ultimately is the case, that we have planned appropriately, because we absolutely do not want a void in leadership in this department. That would be almost catastrophic for us. So it's my perspective that our law enforcement personnel do a wonderful job. They're highly active. We've had some circumstances over the last 12 months that have resulted in fewer people on the street. Can't go into a lot of details, but those have all been resolved due to injuries and other factors. Those have been resolved, and we're back to a full complement again. Chief has recently put a motorcycle officer on traffic, so you'll see a motorcycle officer on. So
My son's noticed.
So now you've got two, and I think that kind of shows you that the department led by Chief Smith are taking proactive steps to have as high level presence as they can possibly have to meet the needs of the community. There was one of the comments about response times and concern about response times, and again, response times are a function of the number of people that are available to respond, and we had a period of time where we were down 3 or 4 officers this year, and we're back up to a full complement of Canby police officers, and I think that that the fact that we are still the number 6 safest city of our size in the state of Oregon is we're number 1. We are number 1. Is indicative of the fact that we're still doing a good job policing and keeping our community safe.
Andrea? Make it green. Yeah,
For a while.
it's kind of stubborn.
Leave it really push. Hold it for a while. There you go.
All right. So, to go with my personal experience again, time frame to get people trained and up, it takes a long time. I'm still learning, and I've been in my position for a few years, and the guesstimate is, okay, even with budget stuff, it's going to take about 3 years until you're fully understanding that. I know that's a little bit dramatic when it comes to finance, but I know that police officers, they have their training that they go through. I don't remember how long it is, but I know that there is a lot of time to get somebody up to speed, able to get in and do that role.
Why we try to steal trained officers from other agencies.
I think Tyler had his card up for a while.
Did you have a question, Tyler?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I wanted to put this on the bubble list, or maybe gather more info between now and the next meeting on this, which was, Rick, you did answer them, great. And I guess the difference between the 4 and the 6.6 was at least partially covered by using reserves. But either I don't know how to read the numbers on here well enough, or I don't know where it's pointed out how much reserves we're using for those things, and sort of the broader picture of how that would eat into our total reserves over the amount of years it might take for our economic growth to catch up to that. So if I could get a picture of that, that would be
I can
awesome.
answer that for you right now.
Oh,
great.
Great. You probably put the line item here.
So the 4% increase in ending fund balance is on the general fund only. The 6% increase in personal services is across all funds. So we're not eating into the general fund reserves. Only some of those positions are paid out of general funds, some will be paid out of the other funds. So that whole 6% is not coming out of the general fund. Does that help?
Yeah.
So no reserves.
So it's not using reserves for that.
Not for the general fund.
No,
but our overall
Yes.
budget. And that does get confusing at times. And that we spend a lot of time discussing the general fund, but you as now sitting, looking at the city's budget as distinguished from the Urban Renewal Agency, are going to see general fund departments tonight if we get to them. But the budget that you're looking at is for all of the operating funds of the city. So there's a bit of an apples and orange, and I appreciate you asking that question, Councillor Smith, because it's important to clarify that, and that's why the expert sitting next to me is much more knowledgeable in those areas than I am.
Any other questions on the budget message?
I actually just had a quick
I'm
comment.
starting to learn. This means I have a question? Okay.
Yeah, Brian,
Sorry.
this is a C4 thing.
I like that.
Just a quick comment, since we are past 8 o'clock and we're only on the budget message, just that, as Councilor Parker mentioned, yes, this is my 8th budget, and we were at 5%, and we're just under 17, and we're able to add folks to kind of pass the baton on to, with the option of when those folks that are eligible for retirement, if they make that choice, we don't necessarily have to replace them, and then that stuff can come back into the reserve. So I'm very comfortable with the succession plan, and that's all I have to say at 8:15.
I am going to give you the Reader's Digest version of the budget, if that's okay.
Is everybody okay? How are we doing? Brains okay?
A little longer?
How much do we need, Rick and Julie, to make some meaningful progress for the
You know, the discussion that we have covers 95% of everything that's in all of the budget units, so I can almost treat this as a quick exception. I do need to go through the committee questions, some of which have already been answered, I believe, quickly, and then we can step through these 8 departments very rapidly, because most of them have no changes at all from their status quo.
You say that, but then we hit cemetery, and then we're here for.
Every year.
Yeah, Greg's holding his head when we get to cemetery.
Greg already put his hand to his head.
What's this so much? I'm not interested in going past 9.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, 9 would, can you give 30 minutes? And we absolutely will not go past 9.
That's a big drop dead. That's 3 hours, so yeah.
All right, let's do, Rick, we got 30. How about on the questions, if you just do the ones that apply to general fund?
Yep.
How's that sound? Okay with everybody? Keep going then? All right.
Yes.
Okay, interfund loan from library to cemetery, I'll save till next time. Question 3 for parks, why does the amount for surveys, master plan STC increase from 15,000 to 2,000? This is funding out of the STC budget for a park master plan and an STC update, and would be funded fully from SDCs. It's SDC eligible. So if we don't do the park master plan update, those funds would just revert back to the SDC fund. Okay. In general, most areas of business within the city of Canby has an increase in internal technology service. What's the reason for this? Our tech charges really didn't change very much this year. The charges to departments are based on the number of electronic devices in each department that's supported by tech services. So if a department had a lot more devices this year than they had last year, then their proportional share will go up. If they had fewer devices, then their proportional share would go down. If department adds more devices, okay, that's,
Rick, didn't we also this year intentionally depress the IT charges?
we did.
We bottomed down, essentially.
It wasn't, was it the IT charges or facility charges?
Facility, okay.
Went down.
Okay.
We did, we had an excess reserve in our facility budget, and we reallocated that excess to all the departments for this 2017-18 budget to get it down to an appropriate level. And that's why the 17-18 charges, internal service charges for facilities were less in 17-18 than they are in 18-19. What you see in 18-19 is likely what you'll see in the future. Courts in more detail, can you explain the fines amnesty program? That's outlined pretty well. It's a process where courts allow defendants to pay off outstanding fines, usually at 50%. It's done for fines that are older and harder to collect, allows the city to collect some of the money on these otherwise uncollectible fines, and allows the defendant to get their driving record cleared. It's also a win-win for us because we only do it on a sporadic basis every 3 to 5 years, and it really only addresses those accounts that would otherwise be uncollectible. So money we typically would not otherwise get.
And you don't recommend that as a personal habit, however?
No.
Okay, just making sure.
We also issue warrants, so.
Yeah, that's that warrants part.
Carrot and the stick.
The response time, I think I already addressed that, I hope. The response time, we're a little bit slower this year in part, and probably to a large degree because we have fewer staff available.
Andre, you had a question about that?
I just wanted to make clarification on this. So I understand that there was the proposal for one police lieutenant, but in the goals where I came up with this question is that it said that the goal was to hire 2 police officers.
Okay, that was a request of the department, and what you're seeing is a recommendation from the city administrator. So the chief asked for 2 positions. I said, how about 1? He said, thank you, and we all moved on.
Or something like that.
Good summary.
Or something like that, right?
Sir, I don't know if this is out of order. Can I make a comment that might help answer a question?
If you want to get up front.
Just real quick, in reference to a question that was brought up earlier regarding response time, but also about a lieutenant versus an officer. I think the lieutenant is going to be the most strategic benefit that we're going to have. And I have a different opinion than what's written down here a little bit about response time, because I think it's going to have a huge impact on response time. Lieutenant's supposed to be carrying the load and help lift some of the burdens from the sergeants. they have detached assignments. It includes training and range. It includes a lot of other things that pull them away from the street. The goal is to get them on the street. If we have one officer, we have to determine where that officer is going to go. And then we have to wait 18 months, 12 months to get them up to speed before they're going to have any impact on call load at all, because they're going to be in training or they're going to be in a car, they're going to be babysat for a long time, unless they're allowed. A lieutenant is going to have an opportunity, we believe, to do some of the heavy lifting. It's going to do some of the things that the sergeants are doing and get them on the street. Now, I have 5 sergeants that are patrol sergeants, 4 of them, excuse me. They now are on the street where I only had 1 officer before. I believe they also can take calls. So what happens is we're on the street, we have a faster response time. It's a safety issue, there's more officers on the street. So as long as our staffing is up and our sergeants are not in the office doing other things administratively that the lieutenant is helping to do, we have a better opportunity to reduce those response times. So I think it's more strategic and it has a direct impact on response time. And we get a better benefit in a lot of different ways. Increased response time, better accountability, better supervision, better involvement in the street, better connectivity. There's a lot of different things. I can go on and on.
Chief, this was number 1 on your wish list for last year that you didn't get, right?
It was on my wish list 8.5 years ago. But I'm just saying. I think this is really has a lot to do with response time. It's a different way of leveraging resources out there in order to sell. Instead of getting 1, I get 4 sergeants that should have more time available. Plus, I have a lieutenant that's going to be on the street that we didn't have before more often because they're a patrol lieutenant. So we really have a multiplying effect that does a lot of different things. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi again. Okay, so I just want to say that I did look up, I know, national average, and I just want to say thank you because you guys are under the national average, and I really respect that. And yes, I just want to say thank you for all that.
And do you want to point out your expertise in this?
My expertise?
With that very large governmental body.
Yeah. Yes. Well, also my husband's a correctional officer for Clackamas County, so.
There you go. Very good.
Okay, moving, if no other questions, I'll move into the departments.
And we're getting a canine dog.
And we're getting a canine dog.
To
replace
We've covered that a little bit later. Yeah.
We have a retirement there,
Oh, that's
too.
right, and we're getting a canine dog.
Yes.
He does, he or she does.
Actually, Rick, I do have a question. Where is the item that shows the reserves? Like that, you know, we've been tossing around the percentage of, like you said, 17% in reserves. Where is that, Julie?
For the general
For the general,
fund,
yeah.
it is on page. Sorry, page 47.
And is it 17%, just to
Just
clarify?
under that.
Okay. Thank you.
The reserves are 27% total.
Where is
It must be
It's,
reserved.
it's just a little bit up from the bottom of the page. There's a whole bunch of lines that say reserved, and there's some that are reserved for specific things. And the unrestricted is at 22%. If you put all of them together, we're at 27.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, Rick?
Yes, okay, so the first budget is the administration budget. This is a status quo budget, no material changes from the the approved 17-18 budget.
Page 48.
Excuse me, yes. Page 48 and 49. And so nothing really to report here. It's basically the same level of service that we had last year.
Actually down a little bit.
Yeah, we're down a few dollars.
Finance, page 50.
Finance, if there are no questions on admin, finance, we are converting an office specialist position to a procurement specialist, making that part-time position full-time, which adds a 0.2 full-time equivalent. Give us enhanced coordination of our purchasing function, and this is a compliance issue We've had questions raised by our independent auditors relative to the processes that we use in managing our purchasing policy. This will help us to work more collaboratively as an entire organization versus on a department-by-department basis to address the purchasing needs of our specific department in a more holistic fashion.
That's actually down about 1% last year. Any questions on finance? All right. Court, page 52.
The court budget is also a status quo budget. What we had this year in the 17-18 budget is we did establish a new court supervisor position. We moved the court oversight to Julie as our finance director, is now also the court administrator to accomplish a separation of duties. That was also a recommendation. You'll note on page 53 at the bottom on the right, you'll see a new number, court collection costs of $20,000. This actually isn't a new expense. In the past, it's been an offset to revenue collections, and it was recommended that this should be a separate expense item in the budget, so we created a new appropriation for it. The net result is that the revenue numbers look $20,000 higher, and the appropriation looks $20,000 greater, but the net effect is zero.
That one's down a smidge as well. Any questions on court?
Yeah, quick question. The helmets used to have some revenue, like $3,000 last year. Was that a grant thing?
That was a grant program, wasn't it?
No, those three lines, helmets, court costs, and city costs, were fines that were broken out into smaller bits, and we just combined them all right back into the fines line because there's no statutory requirement for them to be broken out. So they're just, instead of being separate line items, they're included in the fines and bail line now.
Which is part of why that jumped so much.
What happens when your finance director becomes your court administrator?
The operating expenses per process violation, is that just ongoing personnel, ongoing personnel costs, salaries, and bennies?
For the court personnel?
Yeah, okay, well, yeah, when you look at performance measures for the court on page 52, operating expenses per process violation are going up.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering why. Is that just because of the fact that people are more expensive than they used to be?
Yes. Let me look at this for a second. And we also have slightly increased, we have a part-time person in our court department, and in the current year, we have 2 full-time and 1 part-time position. In the current year, the second full-time position has been vacated twice, and so they're having to do more, and we're finally projecting we're actually going to fill it permanent, which we do have somebody in it. Hopefully she stays longer in a month. And so that's why you see the change from the projected to the proposed, because projected is based on, we had a lot of vacancy this year.
Other questions on court? All right, planning, page 54.
Planning has one major change, which is a recommendation for a new assistant planning director. We've also increased the budget for traffic studies by a little bit. Traffic studies are a reimbursed service. We have been under budgeting it a little bit because we weren't anticipating the level of activity and required traffic studies that what we think we have done now is presented to you a budget that is more realistic and more consistent with where we think the costs that will be reimbursed to us will be. You'll notice that the revenue number above for traffic studies matches the revenue, the expense item below for traffic studies. So they're fully reimbursed by the developer. We do have a supplemental budget that we'll have to bring forward to you on this budget unit sometime before the end of the year.
Questions on planning? Tracy?
Comment, I love the goals, first of all, I just gotta say. And second of all, it says major planning study, in this blue text box or this blue table. There's one proposed for 1819. What is that? The major planning study? Or excuse me, plan amendments, that's what I mean. Do you see that? Third from the bottom of that blue text box.
I don't know what that refers to.
Brian?
Do you know what that refers to? Is that? The transportation. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, which will be held over likely for another year now, because we're learning that grant funding may not be available for a full transportation system plan update. We are in the process of trying to get funding for a very small amendment to address a couple issues that we have in our TSP, with the major TSP coming probably in the 1920 year.
Questions? Jason, you doing okay on questions?
I am fantastic.
All right. Okay, building, page 56.
No changes to building. I will be meeting with the county's building official here in the next couple weeks to discuss the new changes that the state building officials and Department of Justice are making to building plan inspection and building services. We haven't sorted that out yet, but as of right now, the best information we have is what we've presented to you in this budget.
Quick question.
Yes, Tyler.
You said there are no changes, Rick, but the actual, and the FTEs basically didn't change, or I guess from 0.3 to 0.4, but there is substantial change in salaries, insurance benefits, taxes. Why is there, it's a 33% increase, I guess, and
A portion of the assistant planning director is allocated to building as well.
I guess that's a third. From 0.3 to 0.4 is a third increase.
Yeah, it is.
Other questions on building? Everybody good? All right. Police, page 58.
And in this, we do have a full-time equivalent lieutenant position funded. As we've already discussed, we're not recommending the second position that the department had asked for. I would also like to point out to you the under capital outlay, the $90,000 for vehicles. What we are doing this year is we're changing our practice and moving away from leased vehicles to purchase vehicles. And this is I believe the last year that we will have leased vehicles, we'll have the leases paid off, and in the future we'll be paying cash year to year for the vehicles that we bring into the fleet. It saves us interest charges of about 7.5% per year per vehicle.
Right, because lease has to be more than purchase, right? So, I just want to comment, I love the stats. I mean, I'm a nerd, sure, but the stats were really informative just to see the volume of work that the PD does. At the risk of showing off, which I am, that works out to about 1,100 calls per sworn officer. I was just amazed at that.
Well, and that's only if they're all looking at one time.
That's, yeah, and it's not peanut buttered out evenly. So, yeah, you know how you peanut butter? Other questions on police?
I just have one real quick question. Regarding the overtime, is there any way that we're able to kind of make a strategy to minimize that?
We make a strategy to minimize that every year. And depending on a number of circumstances, court appearances have an effect, cases that begin at the end of the shift and don't end until long after the shift will influence that. employees that are absent from work, either due to vacation or illness, and have to be backfilled, influence that. So Chief and Lieutenant Tro both work really hard to keep overtime down to the extent that they can, but there are so many circumstances that dictate the requirement for overtime in law enforcement that are just not present in other types of government services. That we continue to make it a priority and continue to fail miserably at being able to materially affect it. Through no fault of the departments, it's just the way that it is.
And some of that we're
Okay, you could have just as easily have said, it is what it is, suck it up and move on.
Jason.
He'll say that.
Also, thank you for adding the special event security line. It was either council or this body that asked for that last year, so there's no critique of the number. It's just important to see that
It is important to see.
this part of what the city does to support our community events. Other questions on police? All right, Parks, page 61.
Parks, we added staffing, we added the one full-time position, and we'll be adding another position. As a matter of fact, we've made a job offer for a second parks maintenance worker, pending completion of background and other pre-employment work. That will bring our full-time positions performing the actual maintenance activities in our parks and other city-owned properties from 3 in the 2007, at the beginning of 2017-18 to 5 at the beginning of 2018-19. The two positions fully funded with the park maintenance fee. We had originally thought that, I think that our number was closer to 280 to 300,000 for revenue for park maintenance fee, and based on the 3 months of activity that we've had so far, the number of 370,000 we think is going to be a good number. We've done all of the projections for in putting the budget together to determine what the city's maintenance of effort requirement under our new code provisions is. We've calculated that and have determined that when we meet our maintenance of effort requirement and fund these positions, we will still have a material carryover, not enough to fund another position, but it's something to start the next fiscal year with. So we're pleased with that, and as we add new residences and new dwelling units, then those numbers just go up consistently because the park maintenance fee is on a per dwelling unit basis. Let me think. In the materials and services account, as we talked about, the 200,000 is if we pursue a parks master plan update. That would fund that master plan, that park master plan and SDC fee update.
Now we put the fee in, what additional maintenance, or what additional things are we actually showing to the citizens now, additional maintenance or anything?
We are focusing right now strictly on our existing parks. We've got all of our maintenance staff out taking care of deferred maintenance items. The public, I think to a large degree, felt that the parks looked fine as they were, but we all know that we can drive by our houses and they look great on the outside, but as you get closer, you see the moss growing in your sidewalks, and you see stains, and you see paint that needs to be done, and these are all the activities that are now being performed by our parks crews that have gone undone over the years. We're working now with parks, the park staff, with the park committee, with the mayor and council on defining what an appropriate level of service should be for our parks. And so we, at some point in time, will be bringing to the council to the first Parks Committee and ultimately to the council, a recommendation for level of service, which will kind of help us to define how much time staff really should be spending to bring the deferred maintenance up to a prescribed level. Our park crew are so proud of their parks that they will make everything pristine, and we may want a standard that's a little bit below that, and so we may need to counsel them to make sure that we're able to extend the service to a greater number of spaces as we go forward. But right now, we're focusing on deferred maintenance.
Okay.
Edward, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm looking at the fund summary for the current year ending March 31st, and we had for charges for service, we budgeted 450, had an increase of over $13,000 and $61,000 for $61,463. I'm guessing that corresponds with the park rentals, because that's also 450 we budgeted. Was that a one-time event, or is that something we should start budgeting higher?
What are you looking at?
So I'm looking at the fund summary for the current year ending March 31st.
The one I handed out at the meeting
Correct.
last time.
Charges for services, we budgeted $450. We saw a $13,758.4 increase, an amount of $61,463. Was that a one-time event, or is it something that we should start budgeting higher now? Or does that correspond to something else?
That's, I don't know what that is. I don't think we should budget higher, looking at the trend over the number of years. I think that we would consider that an aberration, and so we would go with the number that is consistent with the trend. If we find that we're way off, we can come back in and readjust those numbers at a future time.
Does that answer your?
Yeah, like I said, it's just a high.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And that could have been that what we had was park maintenance fee revenue coming in to the budget through March 31st, which would have elevated that number. And it could have been deposited in that account because we didn't have another account available at the time set up. That's a possibility, because that seems like a really big number.
That's why I asked.
Tyler, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, address the parks piece. I mean, this is, we're getting at giant jumps here. When we're going from 482,000 2 years ago, and now we're going to be just about double that now to 959,000. Now, I understand we passed the park maintenance fee, so there's some extra money in there. They can pay for some maintenance, but that just, to basically double the total expenditures on parks in a 2-year period seems like an astronomical jump. And I guess part of that is the surveys and master plans, but it's going to, I think, take some arm twisting. I'm not sure that $200,000 for a park master plan just seems like a heck of a lot of money. We can employ very qualified people for 2 years straight to do that, and they would not spend that much money. So I've got some concerns with just this one in general, not necessarily questions, but.
Yeah, and those funds would only be transferred to the extent, because we have a revenue offset for that, to the extent of the actual cost. So if it was less, it would go down. So if you take the 200,000 out, you're at 759,611. And the biggest part of that increase is the staffing increase. We're looking at an increase from 370 to 564. So that's almost, most of it. And we have stepped up staffing. But we are staying within the funding that's available with the park maintenance fee.
Tracy?
And the transfer from the SDC fund, the $200,000 there, that's in anticipation of building, right?
That's actually put in there as a placeholder in case the council determines that it wants to proceed with a new park master plan. And Councilor Smith is right, that number is probably considerably high. I haven't done a park master plan myself, so I don't know what the number will come in at, but it's probably considerably high.
Okay, so it's listed twice in different
Once on the
lines.
revenue side and
Right.
once on the expense.
Okay.
And the revenue will only transfer in to the extent of the cost. So if we don't do one at all, both numbers go to zero. If we do one and it costs $35,000, then both numbers will go to $35,000.
Sarah?
So that clears up one of my questions, which is that the master plan is SDC eligible, and so we can use those funds, right? Okay, so that's kind of how that's being funded, not out of, okay. My other question is more curiosity, because it stood out to me. Where did the additional 220 bathrooms come from this year? I know it just stuck out at me on the
More
thing.
frequent cleaning.
Is that what it is? More cleanings?
Yes.
Okay, well that's great. I was like, how many?
That's part of that deferred maintenance.
I know. Okay.
More often now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. It was more curiosity. That number stood out. Like, that's quite a jump from last year. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Exceptional use of public funds.
It actually has, and that's actually a very valid question, because there are two pieces to that. One is that we do have a new restroom that we brought up in the Timber Park area that adds 2 times 52 is 104 right there. And then we, with additional staff, we can come in and do periodic cleaning. As an example, Community Park is extraordinarily busy during the summer season. Waite Park is the same way during events in the summer season. It gives us an opportunity to apply more staff resources to address those needs.
Other questions on parks? Tracy?
The logging road extension, it's that line item towards the very bottom there.
Yeah.
So is that as a placeholder in case?
Yeah, we have the, remember we acquired the property by donation that extends out to the southeast of us. And that is to begin the planning process for the development of that logging road extension to the next stopping point.
But it won't happen in this fiscal year, apparently?
No. No, there's a significant planning process that has to go into place. Community involvement and the mayor's hoping.
4,000 meetings.
Yeah. Many meetings.
We good on parks? More questions?
I have a question.
All right.
The first question is regarding the seasonal or temporary wages. I noticed that they're essentially the same or less. It would seem to make sense to me that the parks are maintained a lot more heavily during the summer months where seasonal staff could be used. Is this to leverage our money better? It seems to make sense to me to utilize student labor and such. Is this not part of the plan, or is it because of like labor agreements? Why would we not look at doing something like that?
We do have seasonal workers that are in the budget this year. As a matter of fact, it is 1.16 full-time equivalent positions to our seasonal for the roughly 4 months of summer that the youth who are principally our labor force will come to work for us. We've actually increased the hourly wage for our seasonal workers because we're unable to fill those positions last year due to lack of interest. We increased the wage, I believe, from 12 to 15. $12 an hour to $15 an hour, because you are absolutely right that labor force is less expensive than a full-time labor force. So we are taking steps and having a little bit more success filling those positions this year.
Okay, excellent. My next question is regarding the park maintenance fee billing line. It shows here that there's $24,000 allocated towards that. And then, as you know, as I understand it, it is essentially getting billed with the sewer and street maintenance fee portion. So when I go to page 93, which is jumping ahead a little, I understand, but under the sewer combined fund, there's sewer billing of $35,000. When I do that math, I end up with an $18,740 discrepancy. Is billing for the parks costing $18,000 more, or is there other money that's spread out through here that I'm not catching?
The costs for the utility billing portion are spread out between Parks, Street, and the sewer fund. That includes the billings portion, what we pay the company to produce the bills, plus the staff time. So it used to be that it was only split between streets and sewer, but now that they're also handling parks, it's now split between all three.
Okay, so would it not be split evenly, or is it split on a percentage base of what's being collected?
Depends on which cost. Staff time is more heavily on the sewer side because that's traditionally where we have more volume with questions. But as far as just straight billing, it's split a third.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, the sewer billing is much more complex than park maintenance fee billing because we have just one fee and the sewer billing is broken down in a number of different categories.
Okay.
The cemetery is status quo. We are, Julia is working with the Public Works folks to review our fee schedule in the hopes that we'll be able to recapture some of the ongoing costs that we've been subsidizing for those services that we're providing in our cemetery system. But other than that, we are now just entering our 4th year of maintaining cemetery after 17 years of having it under a private contract. I think that those persons who travel out there really appreciate the quality of the maintenance that's going on out there now.
One question, Rick, if you get on that one just quickly. We didn't add any FTEs, but the wages, the costs for personnel services went up 17,000. Was that just cost of livings and things like that, or why was there such a jump there?
We didn't add personnel, but one thing we did do is reallocate staffing. And it could be that some of the staffing that we put on, that we assigned to that function was more expensive. I think the more accurate, as I'm thinking about this, the more accurate response is that we were undercharging before, and now we're more accurately reflecting the cost.
Is it because we also added Jennifer?
And it's also because we added Jennifer.
There you go.
Her share of that 1.4
Her share, yeah.
is more expensive than the old share of 1.4?
Her anyway.
Okay.
Because Rick's 1.4 was spread across way more departments.
Yeah, like 37.
More questions on cemetery?
You know the blue table there on page 63, so the landscaping and maintenance hours are almost going to double in 2018 and 19. What was the reasoning for that?
We are trying to work those numbers out a little bit better. There's a possibility that we were under capturing the cost of the landscaping in the past, and there's also a possibility that that's overstated. It won't affect the cost because the staffing is allocated, but I'm guessing that because we did move the assignment from one division of Public Works to another division of Public Works, and the landscaping and maintenance hours here may include the volunteers and community service workers that are working out there as well as the paid staff.
Rick, am I hearing you correctly? You're just saying for 16, 17, and 17, 18, those counts were probably not right. This is what we think the real counts are? Is that?
Yeah, I think that those didn't include the volunteer hours.
Okay.
Like all that work we're doing at Base, it doesn't include Big Park Cemeteries,
No, just Zion. Yeah, just Zion. Yeah, and I'm almost positive because that would double the cost that the difference is in the volunteer hours, not the community service hours. Excuse me.
Oh, okay.
Because we bring community service workers in and we supervise them, and they perform some pretty valuable functions. The other is that we had a little bit of trouble getting some of our seasonal workers hired last year because we didn't have enough applicants, and this will include some seasonal worker time as well.
None of these hours are parks FTE, right?
No,
This is a
they are
completely
not.
different.
We have specifically, the numbers that I gave you relates only to parks, and we've maintained a very clear accounting of that so that we can document the dollars of park maintenance fees spent for parks and city properties.
Yeah, Jennifer.
Clarification, as I'm seeing, just background, I used to work in the funeral business, so I'm seeing 70 burials a year, and I'm seeing the opening closing between graves and mausoleums as $10,000 a year. And it could be completely different here than in places that I've been, but that's really cheap. You guys might want to check the
Yeah, we are.
That's one of the things we're looking at.
Because that's really, really, really low.
Yeah, we're reviewing the entire fee schedule, and
Yeah.
I may just go out and buy mine before we increase.
Yeah, I mean, I just.
Good idea.
Insider trading. There you go.
We have the fee schedule coming forward
My whole family.
next week for council, and there are changes in
An
there.
investment property.
We're gonna put a moratorium on burial salaries.
There's a reason I hate this budget.
So I can buy them and then sell them later?
I wanted to say brace
Actually, an
yourselves.
investment.
That market's never going away, Brian.
No, I know. And we're growing, so the revenue, wow, okay.
Okay, we're coming up on our hard deadline, and I want to honor our word here. And I suspect that we've got more than 5 minutes left.
I don't
here.
know, the economic development is status quo. We are going to refocus a little energy on tourism as in 18-19 year, as we have begun to do in 17-18. But the balance of the budget is what we've been doing in the past.
Questions?
And then the last one that I have is the unallocated, and there are just a really one issue there, and that is the recommendation for the $50,000 library contribution. And you heard my pitch for that, and you'll have an opportunity again during next week's budget meetings if you want to talk about this in more detail when we consider the library budget. But the recommendation is to contribute $50,000 to the library. The rest of it is pretty much straight off stuff you've been used to.
I only have one question on the economic development, unless I'm just not seeing it because it's in smaller print than my glasses are letting me see. I'm not seeing the transient room tax that we just passed.
You won't see that yet because it's not in place.
Okay.
And so if we're not anticipating that we're going to generate enough money to spend in the 18-19
Okay.
fiscal year, and Julie and I actually were having that conversation late this afternoon, and unless something spectacular and specific comes up, which we could bring to you as a mid-year budget adjustment, supplemental budget, I'm not anticipating that you'll see it. I think we'll start with some fund balance in that program area for the 1920 budget.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any questions on the non-allocateds? All right, very good. Well, thanks for staying the extra time, folks. That gets us back on schedule to hopefully finish next week and give everybody the gift of time of not having to do a third meeting. So make sure you read up on the remainder of the book if you haven't already. Julie, do we, at this point, no longer email questions?
You can email them to me. I can't guarantee I will answer them before the next meeting,
Okay,
but it allows me time to research.
so you can have an answer for us. All righty, we don't actually adjourn tonight. We just recess to next week, May 17th, 2018 at 6 p.m. Thank you all for the time tonight. I really appreciate the time away from the rest of your lives. Good night, Camby.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.